Let's talk now about the DFS replication. Creating a DFS namespace does not by itself affect the actual location of the files and folder listed in the namespace, nor does it do anything to improve file services to remote sites. It is the DFS replication role service that performs this task. DFS replication is a multiple master replication engine that can create and maintain copies of the shared folder on different servers through the enterprise network. The alternative to multiple master replication is the single master replication, a much simpler concept in which changes that users make to one copy of a file are propagated in one direction only to the other copies. On the other hand, the multi-master replication is a technique in which duplicate copies of a file are all updated on a regular basis, no matter which copy changes. For example, if a file is duplicated on 4 different servers, a user can access any of the 4 copies and modify the file as needed. The replication engine then takes the change made to the modified copy and uses them to update the other 3 copies. At its simplest, the DFS replication is simply a service that copies files from one location to another. However, the DFS replication also works in tandem with the DFS namespaces. This is to provide unified services, such as the data distribution, the load balancing, the fault tolerance, and the data collection. The data distribution. By replicating shared folders to multiple locations, DFS enables users to access the file they need from a local server, minimizing inter-network traffic and its accompanying delays due to network latency. In addition, by integrating the replicated copies into a DFS namespace, users all over the enterprise can browse the same directory tree. When a user attempts to access a file, the namespace server directs the request to the nearest replica. Then we have the load balancing. A DFS namespace by itself can simplify the process by which users locate the files they need. But if many people all over the network need access to the same file, of the requests are still indirected to the same file server, which can cause a performance bottleneck into the computer itself or on the subnet where the file server is located. By replicating the shared folder to multiple servers, the DFS can distribute the access requests among them, just like clustering. This helps preventing any of the server from shouldering the entire traffic load. Then we have fault tolerance. By replicating your data across multiple servers, you will have a copy of your data on a separate system should you experience a failure. This failure does not affect users because they will be directed to available servers in the DFS server hierarchy. Then we have the data collection. Instead of installing backup solutions at remote sites or performing backups over a WAN connection, the DFS enables administrators to replicate data from remote file servers to a central location where the backups can take place. This data collection is also what we know as a backup centralization. Windows Server 2008 DFS includes a protocol called the Remote Differential Compression, or RDC, which conserves the network bandwidth by detecting changes in files and transmitting only the modified data to the destination. This conserves all of the bandwidth and also greatly reduces the time needed for the replication process. Implementing DFS on a Windows Server 2008 computer requires more than simply installing the file services role and the DFS role service. Once the role and role services are in place, you have to perform at least some of the following configuration tasks: creating a namespace, adding folders to a namespace, configuring a DFS referral order, and creating a DFS replication group. To create a DFS namespace, you must have a Windows Server 2008 or Windows Server 2003 computer with the DFS role and the DFS namespace role service installed. Once you have created a namespace, this computer will be known as the namespace server and will be responsible for maintaining the list of shared folders represented in the virtual directory tree and responding to the network user request for access to those shared folders. In a sense, the namespace server functions just like a file server, except that when a user requests access to a file in the DFS directory tree, the namespace server replies not with the file itself but with a referral specifying the file's actual location. The DFS client on the user's computer then sends its access request to the file server listed in the referral and receives the file in return. Although the DFS namespace does not include the actual data files of the shared folders that populate it, it does require some storage space of its own. This is to maintain the directory structure that forms the virtual directory tree. The namespace server must have an NTFS volume to create the shared folder that will host the namespace. The DFS namespaces role service supports two basic types of namespaces like we mentioned before, the standalone and the domain-based. And like we mentioned before, the domain-based namespace comes in two modes, the Windows Server 2008 mode and the Windows 2000 mode, which are based on the domain functional level of the domain hosting the namespace. As we mentioned before, the first step is to create the DFS namespace. At any time after you create a domains-based namespace, is that what you decide if you are in an ADDS environment, you can add additional namespace servers for load balancing and fault tolerance purposes. Every namespace server must have the DFS namespace role service installed and also must have an NTFS volume to store the namespace share. Adding the namespace servers to an existing namespace only replicates the virtual directory structure, not the target folders and files that the virtual folder refers to. To replicate the target folders, you must use the DFS replication. We're going to actually talk more about the target folders later in this lesson. Once you have created a namespace, you can begin to build its virtual directory structure by adding folders. You can add two types of folders to a namespace, those with targets and those without. A folder with a target is one that points to one or more shared folders on the same or another server. Users browsing the namespace will see the folder you add, plus all of the subfolders and files that exist in the target folder beneath it. You can also create folders in the namespace that do not have targets, purely for organizational purposes. You can add as many targets to a folder as you need. Typically, administrators add multiple targets to a namespace folders to balance the server load and give users at different locations local access to the data. Adding multiple targets means that you will have identical copies of the target locator on different servers. These duplicate targets must remain identical, so you will later have to configure the DFS replication to keep them updated.